This is episode 1 of the Happy Space podcast. Today we're exploring the roots of the podcast and why I believe that everyone deserves a happy space. Welcome to the Happy Space podcast, a place where highly sensitive people thrive. Not only will we learn how to better navigate life with our superpowers, we'll find ways to better manage the challenges too. We'll hear from product and service innovators, space designers, and leaders who believe in creating an inclusive, neurologically safe world. If you're highly sensitive or want to better understand and support someone who is, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Clare Kumar, and I'm so very happy you're here. I'm so thrilled you joined me. Big warm welcome to the first episode of the Happy Space podcast. I'm your host, Clare Kumar, and I am thrilled you're joining me. I thought I'd take the time to do a few things in this very first episode. First of all, to talk about the overall mission and the importance of the podcast, give you a little story and some reasoning why I've created this and why I think it's so very important in our world, especially now, and to bring you a little bit of insights as to the upcoming episodes that you're definitely in a treat for in this season 1. Now, the other thing I wanted to let you know is that if you're listening on audio right now, I wanted to let you know that for the solo episodes, which are going to kick off every season, you'll be able to also follow along with visuals if you're interested over on the YouTube channel. And so over at Clare Kumar's YouTube channel, you'll see a playlist and it's called Happy Space. You'll find all of the podcast episodes there. The solo ones, you'll see a presentation with visuals that I've put together to really support what I'm talking about. And for the interviews, of course, you'll meet in more 3D, no, I guess 2D, but more animated format than just the vocals. You'll be able to see the people I'm interviewing as well. So I extend an invitation for you to sit back and enjoy the audio experience or to pop over to YouTube. Today's episode of the Happy Space podcast is sponsored by ClareKumar.com. Not only am I excited to spearhead the Happy Space movement, I love coaching busy professionals to achieve greater productivity and well-being. The two go hand in hand. I also adore taking the stage. If you're looking for an interactive, engaging event to inspire and invite action, whether it be on successful work-life integration, sustainable performance, organization and productivity, or expanding inclusivity, please visit ClareKumar.com and find out more. Oh, and if you haven't already joined the Happy Space Pod, it's our complimentary online community. You'll find it right at ClareKumar.com/happyspace. I'm so thrilled you joined me. Big warm welcome to the first episode of the Happy Space podcast. I'm your host, Clare Kumar, and I am thrilled you're joining me. I thought I'd take the time to do a few things in this very first episode. First of all, to talk about the overall mission and the importance of the podcast, give you a little story and some reasoning why I've created this and why I think it's so very important in our world, especially now, and to bring you a little bit of insights as to the upcoming episodes that you're definitely in a treat for in this season 1. Now, the other thing I wanted to let you know is that if you're listening on audio right now, I wanted to let you know that for the solo episodes, which are going to kick off every season, you'll be able to also follow along with visuals if you're interested over on the YouTube channel. And so over at Clare Kumar's YouTube channel, you'll see a playlist and it's called Happy Space. You'll find all of the podcast episodes there. The solo ones, you'll see a presentation with visuals that I've put together to really support what I'm talking about. And for the interviews, of course, you'll meet in more 3D, no, I guess 2D, but more animated format than just the vocals. You'll be able to see the people I'm interviewing as well. So I extend an invitation for you to sit back and enjoy the audio experience or to pop over to YouTube. All right, so I'm so glad you're here. Let me just, first of all, introduce you to the mission for the Happy Space podcast. This is really something I've created to inspire a more inclusive world where highly sensitive people can thrive. I really think we've got so very, very much to offer, and you'll hear more as I end out the talk today, really talking about the traits and how important they are. But I think for a long time we've not been valued, we've not been appreciated, and the world can be a really difficult, challenging, overwhelming place, and we're often invited to just back away, step away, burn out, opt out, check out, all of those things. And really what we need to be is invited to participate, not only from us knowing ourselves better and asking for what we need, but also from the environments that we're in being designed to support us. So let me just share a little bit more about me. I am quite well known in Canada in particular, and a little bit broader than that in some places, for productivity and well-being. I've spoken about work-life integration, well-being, organization, and productivity on national media outlets since 2009. And I love the opportunity to speak to media only because, well, not only because, but partly because every time I get a question, it prompts me to think a little more deeply about a topic and also to frame it in a way that's compelling for the listener, so that I hope in this podcast you will be able to perceive some of that thought and intention for you, that I think about crafting messages and summarizing and connecting dots, those things that HSPs generally do quite well. I hope to bring all of that to you in the podcast. I'm an executive coach. I've been working as a coach for a number of years now. I've been a host of the podcast Standout for the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals for the 2020 to 2022 seasons. And that's been amazing. If you want to check out earlier interviews with authors such as Nir Eyal, Gretchen Rubin, Ron Friedman, you're invited to check out the Standout podcast, and you'll hear a little bit about my interviewing style before my own podcast, and really some great tips from thought leaders there as well. I speak internationally, and I also work as a brand ambassador for brands you know and love, brands that for me align with greater performance, productivity, well-being. They can dance at the intersection, as I do, of efficiency, effectiveness, and enjoyment. I firmly believe we have to have fun while we're getting things done. I'm a parent and a pet lover, so you'll probably meet Theo and Elliot at some point. They love to make an appearance. In fact, this is the second recording of my podcast because the first one had too many cat intrusions. And in fact, I had explained the way the first one and thought it was fine. But when I listened to the replay, the very last word, they crashed into a wall, and it was I just thought, you know what, I can't put that out into the world. So hopefully, let's cross fingers that the cats are going to cooperate. But no doubt, you will meet them from time to time, probably in photos. They jump into the back behind me when I'm talking a lot, and Elliot loves to live on my desk. So just a little bit about who I am and my coworkers, if you will. I want to take you now back to really where this all began. I used to work corporately, and I want to take you back to the fall of 2007. And when I say fall, I mean fall quite literally in this case. I was working in my very last corporate job, and honestly, it probably wasn't the right fit for me, the role, but I had been successful there. I had been working, but I was tired. I want to take back to this morning in November in particular. It was raining, it was drizzly. I had been getting ready for work, and I was ready to head downstairs. Now, I'll take you back to the time of pantyhose. I was wearing pantyhose at that time. I haven't worn them in years. Thank goodness that time is over. They were never comfortable for me. And Birkenstocks. So this combination though of pantyhose and Birkenstocks and being tired, I was sort of chronically tired then, ended up with me tumbling down the flight of stairs. And if you're watching the video, you'll see the flight of stairs that I'm talking about. And it just brought to mind Culture Club song, I'll tumble for ya, I'll tumble for ya. And so I threw that in because I don't know about you, but I make associations. My brain connects different things. And so that popped into mind. So you'll see that'll happen from time to time. Anyway, I tumbled down the stairs and, it was a wake up call for me. I had been working really hard. I had been trying to prove that working from home was effective and a reasonable way to go. My job was 90% on the phone. And so I had been working from home about 2 days a week, and I really wanted to continue doing so, in large part because I had 2 young children, and there's a picture of my 2 kids here now. I'll describe them to you if you're listening. So they're about 4 and 6 years old, and in front of them is a fruit plate, and the fruit is all dipped in chocolate. There are 2 cat companions there, which is oddly foreshadowing to my 2 cat companions now who live on the table from time to time. Anyway, these were and still are my joy and delight in the world. They're 2 young, beautiful people now, 18 and 20. They'll probably pop in stories from time to time as well. I really, my kids were in a daycare about 20 minutes away, and I had to work downtown, and it was an hour commute in the opposite direction. Now, this and having to be in the office every day proved to me as a highly sensitive person to be ultimately exhausting. I mean, I talk about highly sensitive people having to pay a tax during their day, and the things that tax our nervous systems tax us a little more. They cost us a little more than perhaps the average person. So for me, it was getting downtown. It was taking the subway. It was being in a 17-inch seat in a down coat, which isn't enough room, Toronto Transit Commission, just saying. It was the noise of the subway cars. Now, Montreal Metro has figured it out. They have rubber wheels, and it's much more quiet down there. It was the noise of the intercom system. It was then going in a tunnel, and then in the dark half of the year, not having any daylight. So there was a lot around the construct of having to show up physically for work that really didn't work. And so I had really tried to prove it, and I had asked my boss, is it possible that I can continue to work from home? Met with a hard no. Proved that I could work from home. Hard no. Lobbied to senior management. Hard no. Tumbled down the stairs and prompted me to ask for a stress leave because I knew things weren't going well. Still a hard no. So the choice before me was either I continue on this path and I burn out, or I make a choice and I choose to opt out. And that's in fact what I did in 2008. I negotiated my way out of that job. And, it's funny because at that time I thought, this is kind of interesting. There may be a story here. I was working for a telecom company. And of course, we sold the equipment to enable people working from home. In fact, my very first project, I think at Nortel back in the day, 1990, was to build the business case for video conferencing. As I bring you a message over video and audio now, I mean, it kind of makes me laugh. And it's interesting because I think I've been in over 60 radio interviews in the last couple of years talking about the future of work. I'm on the Staples Work From Anywhere Advisory Council in Canada, which I'm just thrilled to be a part of, talking about the future of work. And work from home is here to stay. I think it's a huge blessing for HSPs and for anybody with an invisible or otherwise disability of any kind, and anyone with caregiving duties. We've just seen a lot more openness, autonomy, flexibility to the things that we need to manage in life, and boy, we need to hang on to that. Anyway, coming back to the story, so I opted out. That was my choice, to opt out of the corporate world. Pardon me, but it wasn't until about fast forward 8 years or so that I stumbled upon The Highly Sensitive Person by Dr. Elaine, Aron. And this book, like for many of my seasoned HSP listeners, if you haven't yet identified it, I urge you to take the quiz. to determine whether you are a highly sensitive person or not. I have one on my site, which is quite lighthearted and fun, and will give you some clues. The podcast here will give you a lot of clues as to whether you're highly sensitive or not. And certainly Elaine Aron's test of 27 questions, which you can take in 2 minutes, will give you a clue as to whether you're sensitive or not. It was very validating to, first of all, understand there's a trait which applies to 100 different species, and that the trait is a normal way of being. 1 in 5 people, that's a significant number. This is not a disorder. There are other conditions which are sometimes called disorders, which also have their own relationship with sensitivity. I'm thinking of autism, of course, ADHD. If we think of some of the learning challenges, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and beyond, a lot of those conditions coexist with some form of sensitivity. So it's prevalent in society to such a degree that it warrants understanding. Here's the other thing. If we look at traumatic brain injury, anybody that's had a concussion, for example, dim the lights, make it quiet, right? High sensitivity right there. If we look at PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, there is another form of situationally induced sensitivity. And there's studies out of the University of London right now which talk to magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, which indeed show that the typical brain, not the neurotypical brain, but the typical brain right now has signs and evidence as someone who has suffered PTSD. So we are noticing that sensitivity is abundant in the world. I read an article this morning, in fact, out of GQ magazine, talking about a new book called Emotional. And it's talking as well about the fact that we all might be more hypervigilant. So it's definitely prevalent in our society, and why I am so motivated to be bringing content to you, bringing speakers to you, thought leaders, researchers, and examples of HSPs who have really figured out how to live well with the trait. It's because there's so many of us who have great skills that really belong and deserve to be expressed in the world. And I realized that only a small percentage of people actually know about the trait of high sensitivity, also known as sensory processing sensitivity. And so it's so important because while ADHD and autism are quite well known, not quite as well understood, but well known and relative to the HSP trait, perhaps more understood as well, it's important for all those who are experiencing high sensitivity to find their place in the world. And what I'm really hoping is that leaders will be part of that journey. So there are, 2 objectives here. The first is really thinking about the individual. And that's the goal of empowering the individual. First of all, to be aware of the trait, to understand it better. And today we'll begin the journey on some of that for you if this is your first experience with high sensitivity. I'll also be talking about relevant research, whether it's HSP specific research or other studies which relate to our traits and how we show up. I'll talk about ways to stand in the superpowers that we have and strategies to deal with the struggles which present themselves. There's a journey always of learning how, and I'm on it just as you are, of how to better deal with the challenges that come before us. I am so excited to share HSP success stories and also some of my personal experience and learning to really flesh out 50% of the podcast. The other piece comes from our environment, and this is the opportunity to start praising examples of what we're seeing in the world that caters to sensitivity, whether it's culture shapers, those leaders in our workspaces that really understand the value of neurodivergent thinkers in the workplace, whether it's product designers, service creators, architects and designers of shared spaces, whether it's home, corporate, community, or residential shared spaces. There is so much opportunity to really design with sensitivity in mind. And I'll be bringing you, I'm so excited, you'll see who I'm bringing you in this first season. And, you'll want to tune into their thought leadership as well. I think it's really so important that we go from really being a marginalized population invited to burnout as I was in 2008 to being a normalized society, so we understand that, yeah, these people all belong and this is cool. We have a right to be here, and we need to be not only normalized that this is a reasonable way of being in the world, but we need to move to be recognized, appreciated, and really utilized in the workforce. There is so much that our brains have to offer, and really hustle culture is really a big part of why we're not able to shine. So if we can all agree to pause, have a little bit more patience, and invite our neurodivergent minds to participate, look out world, I think you'll see. I mean, if we look at some of the examples of HSPs that are out there, they're incredible. I mean, Richard Branson has dyslexia, and he's shown to be such an incredible thinker. Elon Musk, autism. And I bet if we sit with these individuals, I'd love to have them on the show. But if we look at their deep thinking, their creativity, we need these brains in the world, and we need to have more of this. So I continue on. I'll tell you, I'm playing Spot the HSP now, and I'm looking for great examples of people to share on the show. So here's one. In the first season, you're going to meet partners, Samantha Lacoste and James Willett, and they are giving clients the silent treatment. And that's a good thing. So the silent treatment in this case refers to a quiet service at their hair salon. So we'll understand a lot more about why they chose to do that and how it benefits their clients. We're going to talk to HOK Design Principles. This is a global architecture and design firm, I think present in 23 different countries. And we'll talk to Kay Sargent and Mary Kate Cassidy and get their thoughts. They're really thought leaders in the space of designing with neurodivergent thinking brains in mind, because they understand the value of that thought, and they are working with clients to embed this thinking as they go and design new spaces. So you're not going to want to miss that episode. From there, we go to looking at a fellow highly sensitive person. This is Jen Turnham, and she's going to bring us a concept which she's quite sure of, which is that there are no ambiverts. And when I first heard this, I was like, hey, Jen, what are you talking about? Because I took a test, I can't even remember how, online a while ago, and to answer the question, where am I on the introversion versus extroversion scale? And I found myself pretty much in the middle, but slightly skewing to extrovert. She tells me, no, sister, there's no such thing as an ambivert, and you'll have to tune in as you'll get to hear why she says that and what it's based on, and it has wholly to do with high sensitivity. I'm also thrilled to bring you a conversation with my friend Sunil Godse, fellow Canadian, and he's an author. And he's written the book Gut, and he talks about intuition. So intuition is key for HSPs. Why? Because, we tune in so deeply. If we can tune into this intuition and not dismiss it like I did for many years and make some real wrong decisions, then it can be a power tool if we really realize, because we're getting cues. HSPs are getting cues all the time. Sunil calls them signals, but you'll want to turn into that episode. And of course, this triggered a song connection for me. You'll think of the Jewel tune. Follow your heart, your intuition. It'll lead you in the right direction. So there you go. We'll have musical interludes and cat interludes from time to time, I promise. And I want to take you back now. This is a fond memory for me. I'm going to take you back to January 2020, pre-pandemic. I was treating myself to a trip to New York City for the sole reason of meeting Dr. Aron. And I went to meet Elaine Aron, and her husband Art was there. And there's a picture in the video for you if you're watching along on YouTube. And this was for the premiere, of Sensitive and in Love. It's the second film by Dr. Aron, and this one explores relationships. And since I had made serious relationship mistakes for a long time, and I think, over the past 6 years, I've been really working and committed to having an amazing chapter 2, which I now have. I was really motivated to understand sensitivity and relationship. So I traveled to Manhattan and I went to the premiere, and there's a picture of Elaine and Art. You'll probably remember Art. He is the author of an article that you might remember from the New York Times. And if I get the title right, it's the 36 Questions That Lead to Love. And so I believe he's not highly sensitive from discussions with Elaine, but he clearly is empathetic and tuned in and a deep thinker. So you'll want to check out his work as well. But Elaine and Art, it was wonderful to hear them speak and talk about sensitivity and relationship and how to make that successful. And the film was an interesting take on it from a dramatic perspective, actually, as opposed to the first movie, The Sensitive and Untold Story. And that featured Alanis Morissette. And that has a lot of clips talking to research and the scientific basis for the trait and our understanding of it. So definitely worth checking out both of those. But I'll tell you, Sensitive and Untold Story really was profoundly insightful for me. And on that theme, I gave myself a treat in Manhattan too, and I went to see fellow HSP, Alanis Morissette, fellow Canadian musician. I went to see her musical Jagged Little Pill on Broadway, and that was a treat. Now, Alanis is featured in Sensitive and Untold Story, and you'll get to meet her there. So she's someone loud and proud about being an HSP, as am I, and that's my wish for anybody who's sensitive, is that we get to move beyond feeling shame and discomfort about perhaps being told we're too sensitive or we're too much or we're too this or too that. I really want to invite us to step into those superpowers and be okay with tears that show up that are not necessarily about sadness. They're about emotional perception and a release of some kind. And I think they're a cue that you're dealing with someone who's able to feel, and the people who are able to feel are able to act with empathy for ourselves and kindness for ourselves and others. And I think that's going to be a superpower. You'll hear a little bit more about that in just a few minutes here. But that was just a really fun add-on to my trip to Manhattan to meet Elaine. Now, one of the things I've done, I want to do in this talk, is really share with you my view of the trait and sum it up in a way that I think is easy to remember. Now, Elaine has a model which she's used for years called DOES, and it's comprehensive. I basically take that, and as the organizer that I am, I kind of redefine it a little bit and present it in a way that I hope is a little bit more memorable. And so easy to remember is important, right? Because then we can hold those things close to us and operate with them. And it also provides a bit of a positive analogy. I kind of never knew how to say DOES. Is it does or is it does? And I would always picture a deer in the forest kind of thing, and I wasn't sure where that went. So I want to offer up seed this morning, or today, whenever you're listening to this podcast. I want to offer up seed. And seed stands for the 4 different elements that I think comprise the trait. And I'll take you through them now. And I like the analogy of seed, though, because it implies that you have everything in you. And if we nurture it and nourish it, then it will reach full expression, which is really all those superpowers, and that you'll have a full kit bag as well to deal with all those struggles. This is the kind of thing we explore in the Happy Space Pod, which is the community that is associated with the podcast. And you can find more out at happyspacepod.com. There'll be links to my quiz and the online community, to programs like the HSP Thrive circles that are underway. And And so you'll want to check that out. And if you're interested in learning more, that's where to go. But let me take you right now through the seed model and why I've reconfigured Elaine's model, not to take anything out of that, but just to reorganize it a little bit. So first is sensitivity. And it's sensitivity to whatever incoming stimulation that you have. And we have on the positive side, well, it's all positive, I suppose, but positive for us is that we're able to notice things. We're able to catch that sideways glance that showed somebody wasn't quite on board with what we were saying. We're able to notice something in a room. Fellow professional organizers out there will notice something in a system that's not working that will mean somebody won't use it. For example, a lid on a hamper, or I remember working with a family and a chest of drawers. The drawers wouldn't open and close. A little bit of candle wax on the wood and all of a sudden they would. Now the child is putting away their clothes, or the adult for that matter. So noticing is a huge superpower. The thing is, the corollary there is when there is too much to notice, we can really suffer from overwhelm. And this is how we can step into burnout. So if we have too much to do, we can feel overwhelmed. If we have too much information to process, so you'll see in how I design and try and bring things to you, I try and be sensitive to how much there is to process at one time and keep it simple. We will, similar to someone with ADHD, if there's a lot on a page and no breaks, no breath in the space or no breath on the page or no breath in the calendar, you might start to feel squishy was the word I use with my daughter, or somewhat claustrophobic or somewhat pressured or overwhelmed. And we don't want that happening. So sensitivity is the first part of our trait that's really important and easy to remember at the S of seed. The second one is empathy. And this is our ability to notice and sense the way other people are feeling. And when we can tune into that, then we can act on it. So it's the top number one soft skill, soft as in hard really, but soft for a lot of people, is the number one leadership skill right now that we need given all of the challenges that we've gone through and continue to go through. So empathy, if you're looking for a leader, look to your highly sensitive people. They've got it naturally wired in. And the challenge with being so empathetic, and some of you may be feeling this right now, is that you take in so much. It can be emotionally exhausting. We can go from, feeling it to feeling beaten by it, to be feeling negative, to be needing to retreat from the world. So we have to really come up with some strategies about how we dip in and experience other people, the news, difficult situations. There are things we're just better not to be part of, and there are things we need to figure out how we're going to be part of to be successful. And then beyond that, I guess, is our skill. How can we deal with anything we're thrown at to the best of our ability? How do we step into that place? The next E is emotional perception. Now, the others I've named the same way Elaine has. Pretty much sensitivity was sensitivity to subtle stimuli and overstimulation. She had them as the the O and the S in her model. And I've just said it's all sensitivity. It's just different aspects of sensitivity. When it comes to the second E, emotional perception, I've switched it from emotional reactivity because I think reactivity is one expression. It's one possibility. This intense reactivity is a possible expression, a symptom of the perception that we have. And we can influence our movement from our normal starting point of reacting, quick mind to mouth axis, as my mom always used to say. It was always very quick to be in my mind and just as quickly, almost just as quickly out of my mouth. And that could get me in trouble from time to time. For sure still does if I'm triggered. And so the journey and a lot of my growth has been to to figure out how to slow that down. I have a pause button on my wall, for example. How do I slow down what's happening in my brain before I express it, react with a facial expression, react with some words? I'm continually trying, and it's not easy, but I have noticed gains. And if we can move from reacting to responding, boy, we can really be more effective. Because, if you come out swinging, if you come out with all your emotion, people generally shut down and they stop listening, or you trigger another anger response. This is something we dig into. I dig into it a lot in my one-on-one coaching and also in the group. So if this is resonating with you, there's going to be a lot more on that piece for sure. Moving on to the P, it's for processing, or sorry, the D. I could have called it seep, right? But seep was kind of creepy. Nothing good ever seeps, I don't think. So depth of processing, we're sticking with the D in seed here. And depth of processing is really about the fact that we think deeply a lot. So you can imagine I have thought quite extensively about this model, and I have to give credit to actually Val Nelson, who's an HSP thinker as well. And she was the one in conversation that drove me to come up with emotional perception as an evolution from emotional reactivity. So back to depth of processing. We can think a lot of things, and that can lead to creativity. It can lead to richer solutions. At the same time, it can lead to analysis paralysis and getting a whole lot of nowhere. And so sometimes we can get stuck and we need to find ways out. That's also something that's helpful in a coaching format or therapy, or with a trusted friend, someone who's not critical, someone who's not judgmental and can help you work through things. We can really benefit from having a group of supportive people around us to help us get unstuck and step into those and stay in that place of being in great skill. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of why I'm so excited to be on this journey to share more about the trait with you, to invite you to share with other HSPs who you know, to share with people who are not highly sensitive so that they can better understand and support the HSP community. So this podcast is for me, it's for you, it's for all of us. And I invite you to definitely join the Happy Space Pod. Like I said, you can find out all the information at happyspacepod.com. I want to meet you in the pod, definitely. And it's where highly sensitive people thrive. So consider yourself invited. And I really look forward to spending time with you there. Thanks so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for listening. You can find all of the Happy Space podcast episodes over at happyspacepod.com. That is also where you'll find a link to our online community. Please leave a review over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in. And if you liked what you heard, please share. After all, doesn't everyone deserve a happy space?